Well, welcome. Welcome to Emerging Visionaries. My name's Lynn. I think most of you know me by now. I am the interim executive director of the Marin Interfaith Council. This is the 20th annual visionary event. So thank you for coming. And whoever you are, wherever you are from, whatever you believe, whomever you love, you are welcome here. Before we go any further, I invite everyone to silence their cell phones. I had to do mine just 5 minutes ago. As we gather, as always with MIC events, we begin with spiritual grounding, which will be offered by Westminster's own Jeff Schenkel, the Director of Youth Ministry here at Westminster and one of our newest board members.
I want to first say, of course, as part of Westminster Presbyterian Church, welcome to our home. When we begin what we call our worship services here, I oftentimes remind our congregation that we in the community refer to this as God's house, and if we're all God's children, then welcome home and make yourselves at home. And you are not just our neighbors, you're our loved ones, our sisters and brothers in this community. One of the things that jumps out to me as someone who has worked with youth for nearly 30 years now, since I was one myself, is the prophet Joel speaks thousands of years ago that there comes a day when our young people will prophesy. Men and women will prophesy, and our young people will have visions. Visions is the word that Joel uses. And hundreds of years after that, it was the people who began the Christian faith repeated that phrase, saying we are in that age now. And so it means a ton to me that we are bringing emerging visionaries and these visions to our space here today. So I want to ask all of you to open your hearts and minds to be challenged, that the three of you can speak with boldness and confidence, knowing this is a safe space to share what's truly on your heart, and that we would navigate any of that discomfort with love and kindness. And so I want to offer a brief prayer, if you would. Be so kind to join me in prayer in a way that's custom for you. Open our hearts and minds that your Spirit reveals to us a new way forward as these voices are lifted up, and that love and hope and peace and all things that sustain us find their place in us. Amen. I want to invite friend Sid to come up, our MIC board president.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Jeff, for that beautiful prayer. Thank you to our speakers for being here. And I wanted to thank all of you for coming as well, and to our gracious hosts who repeatedly host this particular event called Emerging Visionaries. I just wanted to share the basis for what this is supposed to be, which is this particular event from an organizational perspective is our annual fundraiser, our biggest annual fundraiser. So there's that aspect to it. And I will, as I am obligated to do, ask you to please donate as you can to MIC. We are always in need of any extra funding. But more importantly, the idea of emerging visionaries is to give a space, a safe space to the voices in our community that have not been heard yet. And sometimes we have this event and they're headlined by people who folks in the community are very familiar with, and we get a packed room and we have plenty of food and run out of it very early, and people are trying to squeeze in here. And I would say this particular night is one where we truly have what the definition of an emerging visionary is in our three speakers, albeit with Zachary, who's a board member, so we are familiar with him. But I think it's important to give a voice to those who haven't been heard so that new ideas can be shared. And it really goes into the heart of what we've been doing as an organization for over a year now, which is, apart from the organizational aspect, we've been trying to answer the question, who is MIC? And without belaboring the point and getting too ahead of myself, one of the biggest tasks that we've had is trying to update our mission statement, which isn't officially updated yet, but the one thing that we keep on coming back to is making sure that MIC is seen as a trusted convener of who, in order to do what, hasn't been exactly set in stone just yet, but we're almost there. But the most important aspect is that we are viewed as an organization that brings people together, and primarily bring people together to talk, to listen, and from that, whatever happens, happens. That's essentially what we should be doing. Our commonality is the interfaith aspect of what we do. But events like this, even though we only have it twice a year, I think, and meaning this event, Emerging Visionaries, and our prayer breakfast being our two primary events, that's something we've discussed as an organization to move away from and try to have more frequent gatherings, not just where you listen to a panel, listen to a speaker, going back to the days of having roundtable discussions more frequently, having topic-related discussions, so that we as a community can grow through the interfaith lens. And as this has now become tradition, where Lynn probably looks at me and says, this is well beyond your time, I'll cut myself short and just say thank you for coming here. And I do hope we see you much sooner than our prayer breakfast, even though we have a lot of work that we're doing organizationally. I hope that the true spirit of what we're trying to do tonight, which is listen and speak to each other, happens much, much more frequently. And with that, I will pass it back to Lynn to introduce our program. Thank you all.
Sid and I have gotten to know each other quite well. Before we get started, I want to offer a few thank yous. A big thank you to Westminster Presbyterian Church for hosting us, and especially to Pastor Bethany Nelson for handling that last-minute request, along with all the other requests I have had to make this happen. And a special thank you to our supporters. When I call your name or your organization's name, please stand up so we can acknowledge you. And if you can, please hold your applause till the end. I want to express deep gratitude to the Dominican Sisters of San Rafael, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Dominican University's Honor Program, First Presbyterian Church of San Rafael, Fair Housing Advocates of Northern California. I don't know that anyone's here from there. Interlude and Associates, the International Association of Sufism, and the Marin Community Foundation, who is one of our biggest sponsors. Thank you for being supporters of this event. I'd also like to acknowledge all of our MIC board members, so if you would please stand up. And if there are any past board members, I know there are a few, please stand up as well. I'd also like to thank Nicole Cuzzy, who nobody here has met. I've only met her a couple times, but she is the person who does all the communications from her own home. She's a mom, and she works from home, and so we communicate pretty much by email, but I am grateful for that extra support while I'm doing this. Our theme tonight is navigating turbulent waters. It's been less than a year since we were last here, but in that brief time, so many changes have taken place that seem to me like a step backwards. Multiple wars have challenged us, our beliefs, and our relationships as we deal with their consequences. Civil rights seem to be taking a step back to power. How do our faith traditions speak to us as we grapple with this new world in which we find ourselves? That's part of what we will explore tonight with our speakers. While our speakers tonight will offer their unique perspectives, the truth is that we are all being challenged to find our vision. Each of us is being called here and now to be a presence of healing and radical love. That is why we are here, to seek wisdom, to surpass barriers, and to build a community grounded in respect and love. With that, let's turn to our speakers. I will invite them to come forward at this time. Come on out. And after we hear from them, we will have time for you in our audience to have a brief conversation with a neighbor. I'll introduce them in alphabetical order. And these guys are the tail end of the alphabet. But let's see. Chloe Shin is a Korean-American Christian from the Southern Baptist denomination. She was born and raised in this tradition, but what ultimately solidified her faith was having a supportive, warm community and serving the church through being a vocalist for the praise team. She is currently in her last semester of nursing school at Dominican University. She was inspired to become a nurse by her mother, who is a pediatric nurse, and her brother Wanjin, who is on the autism spectrum, and who she had many opportunities to take care of growing up. Chloe is honored to participate in this year's Emerging Visionaries, because while her faith has always remained strong, she hasn't often expressed it openly. She is glad that this opportunity allows her to share and to learn how others with other faith and religious traditions navigate turbulent waters. The Reverend Erin Wiens St. has been the curate at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in San Rafael since June of 2024. Born and raised in San Rafael, Erin is a Marin girl through and through. She was formed by several churches in the area, including First Presbyterian Church of San Rafael and Grace Cathedral Episcopal in San Francisco. She came to St. Paul's as a seminary and intern in 2021 and fell in love with the congregation, leading her to stay and put down roots. In addition to helping preach and preside, she helps run the St. Paul's Death Row Ministry, the youth program, and the young adult program. In her spare time, she loves to cook, bake, and play board games. She brings much joy, enthusiasm, and deep gratitude for the community's investment in her formation. Zachary Twist has been an active leader in the Bay Area Muslim and interfaith communities for more than 25 years. He currently serves on the boards of the Islamic Center of North Marin, the Marin Interfaith Council, thank you, the Interfaith Sustainable Food Collaborative, and North Star School, a respected K-8 Islamic school in the East Bay. He is committed to building bridges between the world's great faith traditions, championing education and understanding, and working to create a more just, compassionate, and sustainable world for all. Zachary was the director of operations at Zaytuna College during its formative years, contributing to the development of it as the first accredited Muslim liberal arts college in the United States. He has studied with some of the world's most prominent Muslim scholars and draws on those years of learning to share the spiritual depth and intellectual richness of the Islamic tradition in interfaith and public settings. Zachary also leads Claristic Consulting, a business consultancy, and lives in San Rafael with his wife and 3 children. I'm going to join them right there. But as I do, I'll go ahead and have you all just say a little bit about yourselves, introduce your faith background in.
Good evening. My name is Erin, as Lynn said, and it's a privilege and an honor to be here tonight. We've been asked to just share a little bit about ourselves, our faith story, our faith background, so I'll do that briefly. I was privileged to be born and raised Presbyterian. My mom is ordained PCUSA, and so I always feel like I was very fortunate to grow up seeing women in the pulpit and at the altar, and that was very formative for me. I was also the only child in my congregation, and so that was a very unique experience, less common back then than it is now, but I think that was an experience of being unconditionally loved that was very important and formative for me growing up. And then when I was about 13, we were looking for a new faith community, and my mom created this list of churches that she wanted me to experience for the first time. Grace Cathedral, an Orthodox church, an evangelical megachurch, some places I'd never been before. And Grace Cathedral was the first place that we went to, and if you've ever been to the cathedral on a Sunday morning, the curtains opened and the incense wafted out and the men and boys choir started singing, and that was that for me. I've been an Episcopalian ever since. And it was about a year into my time there that someone reached out to me and asked me to become a verger, which is kind of a unique position in the Episcopal tradition that's almost like a caretaker of the church, a caretaker of the clergy during the services, a caretaker really of the liturgy. And so I started doing that on Sunday mornings, and then I eventually began doing that over the summers professionally, and it really solidified for me my vocation. I'd always knew that I wanted to do something ecclesial, but it really solidified for me my vocation as a priest. I remember stopping in the middle of the cathedral one summer morning and thinking, I could get paid money to do this. And I think that's how I always wanted to feel about my job and my work. And then I went to college, and when I was there, it became very clear to me very quickly that the vast majority of my peers hadn't grown up with a community that loved them unconditionally in the way that I had. And the only adults in their lives who cared about them or who were very close with them were their parents. And that's great, but I watched, estrangement with their parents or simply just being a teenager, meaning that their community kind of fell apart. And the toll that was taking in terms of mental health, and just in terms of a sense of spiritual grounding. And yet, the churches, the mainline Protestant churches, were not places that were interesting to them. And the more conservative churches were places that weren't very welcoming of either them or their LGBTQ friends. And so that is when my vocation became not just something that was personally enriching and fulfilling for me, but also some way that I felt I could really impact my generation by making our open and affirming and accepting church and denomination a place that they felt like they wanted to come and be so that they could then experience the same kind of community and unconditional love that I was fortunate enough to grow up with. So I went to seminary. It's a long process. It was 7 years to get ordained for me. That's pretty typical in our church. Andrew's nodding. And then during seminary, I was matched up with St. Paul's in San Rafael, which was not the congregation that I expected to be serving in. But in many ways, it felt like a homecoming for me because Marin County is an extremely unique context for ministry. And having grown up here, I felt like I was uniquely equipped to be able to serve here in a again, very unique context of secularization. And so to get to come back and serve in San Rafael and to still be serving in San Rafael is very special for me. So I stayed at St. Paul's after I got ordained about 1.5 years ago, and we're very grateful to be part of that community. It's a real gift.
So that's me. Zach?
Yeah, first of all, it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Westminster, Jeff, and Bethany, and the team, and everybody here. It's a delight to be here. Let's see, my faith journey is a long story. I have to do a short version of it. So let's see if I can do that. I mean, I grew up in San Francisco. I went to school in Marin growing up. I went to in high school at Branson, and then I went to Marin Catholic. And I was raised in a Christian household, but not super religious, but like a very typical Christian upbringing, American Christian upbringing, and going to Catholic school. But I was a person who really liked to know things and was interested in knowing about the world, and in a way that maybe was almost like a little bit of a know-it-all, like a little kid who was trying to know everything. And but I had a lot of questions as a Christian, and I remember at Marin Catholic I used to ask a lot of questions in a religious studies class that some of the teachers didn't like all my probing. But one of them actually, her name was, she was a nun there, her name was Cindy Wasco, amazing woman, and she always encouraged me to be thoughtful and questioning. And I was developing a sort of a little bit of an atheism in that space. In a Christian context, I was questioning quite a bit, and I started to question just the concept of religion altogether. Like, this is all made up stuff, it doesn't make any sense, and pushing back. And I still have one of the papers I wrote in high school that I wrote in religious studies class, why God does not exist. And I wrote it, and this wonderful nun, Miss Wasco, she said, "Good job, keep thinking." She gave me an A on it, an A+ on it. And I'll never forget her, God bless her. But it was part of my journey of sort of like pushing back and really rejecting what I saw, the framework of faith and religiosity that I saw, that I had questions about it, and they weren't being answered by that. So I became sort of an atheist, at the same time wanting to know about the world and wanting to understand things more. So I was also exploring other faith traditions. And at one point I realized I didn't know anything about this religion called Islam. I knew that it was like a big deal. It was like there was people who were doing terrorism or something like that. But I said, what do they believe? I don't actually know what Muslims believe. I didn't know what century stuff happened. I don't know what region. I don't know the major figures. So I just said, I should learn about that. I should know about that. And I started researching a little bit, not to consider it as a spiritual path, but to know about it, because I realized, I read something that 1 in 4 people on this planet are Muslim. I said, wow, I don't even know anything about that tradition. So I started looking at it a little bit just to know about it, and I was immediately impressed by it. Like its beautiful simplicity, the belief in one God, the belief in all the prophets, belief in Jesus and Moses and Abraham. I was like, well, wow, this is interesting. Very compelling and very practical the way I saw it. But it wasn't a spiritual path for me because I was an atheist. And then over time, life just has its unfolding. I think God has a plan for all of us, right? We all have our path. Like everybody in this room has been kind of taken somewhere on your journey. And I was taken some places on my journey. And I won't get into all the details, but eventually I found myself, around Muslims. A friend became Muslim. I just started to hear this calling from this faith tradition that I had so much respect for, that seemed so sensible to me. I was amazed by how sensible the religion, it seemed like outwardly, Muslims seem irrational, they seem like, difficult, and there's lack of rationality in the religion. I was impressed by it's so incredibly sensible and practical a religion. And so as I started to have a shifting in my spiritual awakening, where I started to believe in something greater than myself, greater than my own know-it-all mind, something greater than everything that I saw around me, I started to see that there's something beyond this, that there is something greater, that there has been messages from the divine that have been sent to humanity. And I started to make these connections, and Islam started to fit right into all of that. And a lot of the questions that I had as a Christian in Catholic school, I started to see how Islam answered those. The nature of Jesus and Scripture and so forth. It just like Islam just resolved so much of that messiness. For me, it was like a messiness within my understanding of Christianity that Islam just cleaned it all up. So it became sort of it became so compelling for me, Islam, as a faith tradition and as a path. And then, like I said, on our journey, I just was landed in certain places. So here I am. Oh my God, this is amazing. And so after I graduated from college, I went to UC Santa Barbara, and I ended up back in the Bay Area. And again, God placed me in certain places. I had a plan, but God had another plan. And God put me in certain places, and eventually I formally became a Muslim in 1997 in Berkeley, California. And that began a whole nother journey, because it's just like, it's the beginning of learning how to live as a Muslim, as an American Muslim, and so forth. And I was very, very fortunate to have access to real Muslim scholars. Actually, it's a blessing in the Bay Area here. There's actually some great Muslim scholars here in the Bay Area, American Muslim scholars who have really know the tradition, studied it deeply, and also have found the way to really articulate it in the American context. So I was very fortunate to study with some of them at Zaytuna College that was mentioned, and was part of that, the growth of that institution, and I just have been in trying to be in service of the community, in service of the Muslim community, because I think there's a lot I've been able to offer and do there, but also in the larger community. I think for me, Islam is part of this wisdom, that human wisdom that is part of our world today, that I think a lot of people are kind of, it's a blind spot, honestly, in our society. People don't really see the gift of the Islamic tradition. You don't have to become a Muslim to benefit from the wisdom of this tradition. It's a beautiful tradition. So that's part of my commitment, is to just share that and to draw the connections for people. And I've been blessed to be involved in the Marin Interfaith Council and some of these community things. So that's the semi-short version of my faith story. Yeah.
Thank you. Chloe?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lynn. I'm so honored to speak to you guys today. So yeah, as you guys heard, and I've met some of you guys too. My name is Chloe. I am a proud Korean American, and I'm in my last semester of nursing school at Dominican University of California. I grew up in Walnut Creek, California, which is a predominantly white-based community and city. For me, this meant navigating through a constant, subtle culture shock. So at school, I felt like I was always trying to fit into the American norms, but at home, I was very much so involved in my Korean heritage. This duality that I lived really taught me to become an observer at a very young age, to read rooms, to listen very carefully, and to really just understand what it's like to be, in some ways, an outsider. So this was my very first lesson in empathy without me even knowing it. Getting into my faith, I was born into Christianity and have been a part of the Southern Baptist denomination my whole entire life. Growing up in a Christian household was very interesting because this was the very air that I breathed. It was really the only reality that I ever knew of. And so because everything was so foundational, I felt like it took quite some time for me to figure out my unique placement within it all. And for a long time, that place was actually behind a microphone. And I realized that my talent for singing wasn't just a casual hobby or merely for just enjoyment, but it really was a gift from God. So I used this gift to serve as the main vocalist on my praise team, starting all the way back from the beginning of middle school to the end of high school. So yeah, church really became my safe place for me. But life, as it does, really brought a new season that tested my sanctuary. In middle school, my parents had gone through a very public and painful divorce. My biological father struggles deeply with addiction, alcoholism, and physical abuse. So his absence had left a pretty big scar on our family. And even though there was my mom and there was the three of us, the four of us in total, it still felt like overnight our world had completely shattered. And the stable foundation that I had grown up with was just no longer there. It was completely shaken. So from there on, I struggled heavily with my mental health, all the confusion, the anger, the sadness, just this cocktail mix of emotions that I had was really just a weight that I really didn't know how to carry. And so it was in this time of darkness where I really had to make my faith my own. It was no longer just the air that I breathed, but it really became the anchor that I clung onto. And the songs of praise that I was singing every Sunday, they weren't just performances anymore, they were prayers and cries for help. And my church wasn't just a building anymore either, it became a refuge. And it was really through my church community and my church overall where they really showed me a different kind of love that deeply contrasted from my earthly experience. But I would say it was in the middle of that personal storm where I feel like God began to reveal my purpose in a new way. And it was actually in front of me the entire time. It was through my brother, Wonjin. I've had the greatest honor and the privilege of taking care of and growing up with my brother Wonjin, who is on the autism spectrum. At a time when my own heart was broken, caring for him forced me to look outward. He was and is a gift that taught me a compassion that goes beyond words, and I really feel like I got to find my purpose outside of my pain. In his nonverbal communication, I learned how to speak and to listen with my heart. And he really showed me that healing isn't always something that's so dramatic and big, but it really lies in all the soft, patient, and consistent acts of care. So that period of my life was where I feel like my calling was truly shaped. I experienced firsthand what it feels like to be broken physically and mentally. And through my brother, I learned just how powerful a single compassionate presence can be in the midst of all of that brokenness. So I learned that I wasn't just here, and I'm not just here to serve with just my voice, but to heal and to connect with my heart and my hands. So that's what led me to my future profession of nursing. As I'm preparing to become a new grad nurse, my mission is to serve all communities, regardless of their background, their race, ethnicity, wherever they came from, with the same deep care and compassion that I learned at home. My journey isn't one that is of different change or different direction of any sorts, but it really is a journey in finding my purpose in my family and faith. And yeah, that's who I am. Thank you.
Thank you all for deepening our understanding of your lives and your faith and your journeys. We came up with a bunch of questions, and I'm not going to go in order because why should I? One question that I think I was looking at is what grounds you in your life during difficult times? What grounds you in your life during difficult times? And you don't have to go in order. You can, whoever wants to speak can speak.
You can still go first.
Sure. Well, certainly there are spiritual practices that are extremely important to me. In the Episcopal tradition, we have the Book of Common Prayer, which is an extremely rich resource that I find can meet me in so many different contexts. So that has been really beautiful for me. I find the less I feel like praying, the more I should be praying. And so that has been kind of a maxim for me in this season of life. something recent that has really grounded me, and I actually preached about this on Sunday, is a book that I discovered in the garage about my family who were Mennonite from the Reformation all the way up until 2 generations ago. And this book had biographies of my direct ancestors from the 1800s all the way down to my generation. And I had the opportunity to learn about the persecution that they suffered almost universally, but particularly around the time of the Soviet Revolution when most of them were in Russia, and the ways in which they persevered, not only in their private faith, but also in their public faith. Like, the government would come in and export them all to Kazakhstan to go work in the coal mines, kids and all, and the first thing that they would do when they got there is build a church. And they'd been exported there for being Christian in the first place, for being religious in a Soviet state. And that really changed things. I think spending time with all those biographies for me really made me feel like hard things are like in our blood. Like we can do hard things, and not just me and my family, but all of us in our own faith traditions can probably point to spiritual ancestors who have had similar experiences. And so to be able to look back on that and draw from that and feel like, okay, I'm not the only one like reinventing the wheel here, that's been really important for me in this season of life.
I think during difficult times, it's actually really important to be honest. For me, I definitely feel the anxiety too. I feel really worried about the state of the world, and I feel like sometimes thinking about the problems and thinking about how big they are can be so unfathomable for one person to take on that it can feel really paralyzing. But one thing that I consciously do consistently is to shift my perspective from what I can't control to what I can control. I think that's really important to keep in mind. I can't control the hectic global politics that are going on around the world, but I can control the amount of care and how I give care to my patients that I see almost every single day. I can't fix all the broken systems, but I can be a steady presence for somebody who is feeling also very worried that is physically closest to me, like my friends. So I feel like having this kind of perspective in mind has been kind of like the bedrock, really, of my nursing practice. It gives me the perspective that my role isn't to really single-handedly save the world, but to really just be a steady presence, like I said, right where I am. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Service, I think, I'm hearing from what you're saying is service, and also you're sharing about these examples of people who struggled before us and were patient and persevered. I feel like it's what grounds me as well in difficult times. I guess difficult times is like, well, whose difficult times? My difficult times or difficult times in the world? You know, I would say I'm doing pretty okay, you know, compared to, if I compare myself to others. That's one of the things that it's grounding, right? When you look out and you see the difficulty and the suffering out in the world, you can say, oh man, I'm okay, you know? A lot of people are having a really hard time. I mean, it's kind of always available to us, isn't it? If we have anything happens in our life, and it can be rough. Some of the people in this room probably have some really, really intense suffering that I can't speak to, right? But I would guess that even you could find someone who had it worse off than you, or had more pain and suffering than you, and that puts things in perspective. But I think this example of others who have suffered before us and persevered, as Erin was talking about, I think there's something there. In my tradition, the prophets who came before, their stories of the prophets are many times the stories of incredible resilience and perseverance under extremely difficult circumstances. You know, hopefully you guys know that in the Islamic tradition we have many of the exact same prophets as the Christian and Jewish traditions as well. So we have Job, who is, we know, those of you who know Job, you know it's like this is a one who suffered and persevered, but still depended on God and was still grateful. And Abraham and Noah, right? And Moses, all of them are in our tradition. Jesus, peace be upon all of them. In our tradition, we say peace be upon all the prophets. So these are examples for me. And the prophet Muhammad in our tradition. These are individuals who suffered and persevered so much that grounds me as their example and their stories. You know, my children are named Abraham and Jesus. Those are my sons. My twin sons are Abraham and Jesus. But Muhammad is the incredible example in our tradition of perseverance and resilience under incredible difficulty. He was born an orphan. His mother died when he was 6 years old under extremely difficult circumstances. And he had this incredible life. So that's, I think, for me, is those examples of the prophets in our tradition and how they persevere. That grounds me. And then, of course, serving others, like you were saying, it's just like puts it in perspective, you know. And also just having prayer, some sort of spiritual practice is obviously very grounding, and being relating to the earth as a spiritual practice is grounding. So I would say that, yeah.
Thank you all. How do you see the role of faith and/or religion in our time? How is it important or valuable?
Tell us who goes first, Jen. You got to just put us.
Zach, you go.
Well, I'm kind of passionate about this topic. I mean, I think faith is so important in our time. And I think that's why I'm involved in interfaith work. That's why I'm involved in my faith traditions work, but also the faith-based connections that we're making. I think faith needs to be pushed forward. I think it needs to be celebrated. I think it needs to be honored. There's so much wisdom. This is human wisdom that goes back. It's primordial wisdom. And I think in our time now, as many of us are, the state of the world, oh gosh, what's going to happen? This promise of modernity, this promise of technology, and this promise of all these things solving everything, making us all happier, I think it's kind of not working out. Maybe this solution that it's all going to be amazing when we all get, everything gets more advanced is actually not working out. And that maybe we can go back to something that has been working out for a long time for human beings. And I know maybe in the back of some people's mind it's like, I don't know, religion hasn't really been working out. People are fighting over it. No, we're talking about what's innate we feel like it's innate in us to be compassionate, to be taking care of your neighbors, to feed the poor. These are religious principles. This is embedded in our society from its primordial knowledge that our religious traditions have brought forward. So I believe that faith is the carrier of that in our time. People are trying to go back to that. People are trying to go back to the earth. People talk a lot about indigenous traditions, right? The indigenous people were talking about being one with the environment and treating it with respect, and this is what I'm talking about. Our sacred human wisdom, the primordial wisdom, is so needed now. And it's not, what's not needed is that one faith wins over the other. Like, okay, whose faith is going to win out? No, these faith traditions all need to be brought forward and celebrated because they're all sort of being pushed aside by this manic worldview that we have now that's super destructive, actually. It's not grounded in anything besides this sort of strange futuristic technology thing. It's not working. So faith is where we have something here. And I think it's really important that people go back and celebrate faith and share their faith traditions and treat it as sacred human wisdom that it's been tested over thousands and thousands of years. So let's bring it forward. Let's talk about it. Let's share about it. Economics, the environment. Faith traditions have solutions for all of these things. And we're ignoring it at our peril. And our faith traditions have warned us also, the prophetic side, speaking of the future, in our faith traditions warned us about some of the things that are happening now. So it's very, very important, I think, from that perspective. And people need spirituality. That's a whole other reason why we need faith traditions, because people need some sense of spirit. It's like a foundational aspect of just human health to have a spiritual practice. So it's just, there's so much there. It's a rich resource for humanity and for our communities. And so that's why I think it's important in this time. Yeah.
Chloe?
Sure. So, I really like what you said, Zach. That was really good. I'm kind of like speechless right now. Well, I believe that the role of faith in our time is actually really deeply paradoxical. So like on one hand, I feel like religion, including my own, is often co-opted as a political tactic or a cultural identity marker. It's kind of used to divide people into camps almost often, and as a result, it gets like a really negative reputation, especially on the media. So I feel like religion right now in our time is often used as a tool for judgment rather than a source of grace. But for me, I see the role of religion as a bridge and not a weapon. It really shouldn't be about political power, but about, like you said, Zach, like inspiring grace and inspiring service as well. So when stripped of political agenda, faith offers a moral compass as a guide that we can follow along. And it can guide us towards humility, love, especially loving our neighbors who are different. And I feel like that's also a message that we should be sending out more often, especially during our time. So yeah.
Yeah, the first two things that came to mind when Lynn asked that question were two answers. One of them is community, and community on a really fundamentally deep level. Community that shows up at one another's doors with a warm pot of food whenever someone is sick, or prays someone into health, or sends a card when someone you love dies. I think that kind of community is something that is very familiar to my grandparents' generation and not very familiar to my generation. And churches know how to do that backwards and forwards. And all faith communities know how to do that backwards and forwards. And so I really feel like that is something that faith and religion have to teach us in particularly these politically polarizing times as an antidote to judgment, as an antidote to polarization. The other pillar that came to mind as something that faith can offer is tradition, is the rootedness. There's been some jubilation in the mainline Protestant community over some recent surveys showing that Gen Z is reversing the trend of church going, and that there's actually more people from Gen Z going to church than previous generations. And primarily into conservative Catholic and evangelical churches. And so I spent some time recently doing some research into why this is. And what I really found is that what these folks are looking for, particularly young men, is a container for all the chaos, right? An antidote to the chaos. And so a faith tradition that can offer clarity around clarity and accountability. So clarity around what we're supposed to be doing as human beings, and then accountability to actually be doing that. And then thirdly, the resources and support to learn how to do that if you don't already know, right? So faith traditions can offer all three of these things as a sense of rootedness and tradition, because again, we have been doing this for thousands of years in our varied traditions. And so we know how to create these containers that are antidotes to the chaos around us. And that, I think, is particularly valuable, particularly to younger generations right now.
You guys are blowing me away. Let's see. How is your faith community experiencing the times we are in? Does it have challenges? Does it have sources of solace, gratitude, or joy? How about you, Erin?
So at St. Paul's, we are fortunate to have both Democrats and Republicans in our congregation. Primarily Democrats, because after all, this is Marin County, but we do have our handful of staunch Republicans. And that's a little bit different than many other Episcopal churches. And so under the leadership of my colleague, Christopher Martin, we've done something a little bit different than most of our sister parishes throughout the diocese that I've really come to respect and appreciate. There are those parishes in our diocese that are doing the good and extremely important work of marching every weekend and preaching very clearly in the pulpit about what is happening in the newspapers. And all of that is very important. And at St. Paul's, we've chosen to do something different, which is for Christopher and I to really take a step back in terms of our own personal feelings about what might be happening, and instead to facilitate that community that I was just talking about, where you can have Democrats and Republicans who are not only sitting side by side in the pews on Sunday morning, but who are serving one another at coffee hour and taking meals to one another when they're sick and praying for one another, and really just unconditionally loving and worshiping Jesus together. And to be able to do that as Democrats and Republicans is something that is increasingly rare, not just in a religious context, but in any context in the United States these days. And really to prevent our congregation from turning into the same kinds of echo chambers that we are seeing on social media and in other spaces, which is really hard work, right? It's hard. We have found, particularly in the last 10 months, that it is really not necessarily easy work. And we've committed to having the hard conversations, but I think 10 months in, we're really getting there as a congregation. And that's really beautiful to see, to have gotten into this rhythm in this new kind of political era that we're in. Is a gift, and it's not a given. I wasn't always sure we were going to get there, but we have, and I'm really grateful for that. And I continue to be grateful for the witness of my bishop and our sister parishes who are doing more of the explicit advocacy and activism work. That's really important too.
Zach.
Well, it's a difficult time in the Muslim community in many ways. As I mentioned earlier, you can always look at something else or somebody else and say, well, they have it harder, so it's not so bad. And that's certainly part of our experience as Muslims, actually, because there are some challenges that we have as a community, like here in Marin, but we can also look at other Muslim communities in other parts of the world and say, oh my God, they have it so much worse than we do. The example of Gaza obviously stands out. The suffering that we see out of Gaza, it's heartbreaking. So there's kind of two sides to that, right? There's it makes you feel whatever difficulty you're undertaking in your own space is not as bad, but you're also brokenhearted because you're witnessing people who you naturally have human kinship with, children and men and women and every people suffering so intensely. And because the Muslim community, we have Palestinians in our community, we have Arabs in our community, we have people, the Muslim, there's this concept for Muslims called the Ummah, which is that we have this connection amongst Muslims. We come from, the word Ummah is related to the word mother. We have a sort of a shared mother in our connection to our brothers and sisters around the world. So we have this feeling of pain witnessing that. There's Palestinians in our community. A friend of mine, he's lost, I think it's now 120 family members in Gaza have been killed. And just in one day, 25 people will be killed because they bomb a whole building, and there's families living on multiple floors, So the suffering is just mind-blowing. And so there's that difficulty of hearing all that and seeing that and wanting to do something and then you can't. Like the witnessing horrors, and then it's like you're tied to a chair, you can't do anything about it type thing. You want to, how do you do something about it? So there's that feeling, which is very difficult and painful for our community in many ways. But it's amazing to see. One of the things that's actually beautiful for those of you who actually seen some of the resilience of the people in Gaza and their strength in their faith, and this is Muslims and Christians. There's many Christians in that area, that how just deeply rooted they are in their faith and how patient that makes them and how resilient that makes them. And it's a characteristic that's really emphasized in our spiritual tradition, is being patient and knowing that God sees, has a greater plan. There's many statements in the Quran about that, that after hardship comes ease. And that sometimes you see something happens to you, and you think it's bad, but it's actually good for you. Sometimes you think something's good for you, but it's actually bad for you. And God knows and you do not know. That's a verse from the Quran. So what I have witnessed in our community is this sort of, this leaning into the patience, leaning into trusting God, leaning into that example we have. Like I mentioned, the prophets in our tradition and so forth, and the example of Muhammad is one of the highest of those of just being patient and being resilient. So I witnessed that. I mean, the speakers on our pulpit and our sermons and whatnot, they're usually calling to that. They're reminding people about that in a very beautiful way. And like Palestinian friends I know who, they're just so beautifully patient. Oh, amazing people. So yeah, there's that difficulty in our community. And then, I don't want to go too long, but there's definitely layers to it. Our community, where we're also experiencing is this a rise in anti-Muslim sentiment, just like we've seen anti-Semitism on the rise, and there's anti-Christian sentiment too. I mean, there's a current in our society of like blaming religion and blaming people like almost like that they're not even human. They're animals. They don't belong in this. For Muslims, there's this, you're not compatible with Western civilization. There's that kind of language out there. It's very, very prominent now. And I believe, and I'm seeing it, there's an agenda to really demonize these traditions. And I'm certainly very present to the demonization of the Muslim tradition as being some sort of like threat, like a threat. Like there's this even concept that's spread around online about that Muslims have this concept called where you're supposed to lie to me. It's part of their religion to lie. I mean, how insidious is that? That's a lie. Okay. How insidious is that? Like if I bring cookies to my neighbor, right, and say, hi, I'm your Muslim neighbor, and I just wanted to say hello. And, oh, he's lying. He's trying to trick me. Everything is under suspicion in some ways from that. It's very insidious, So we're experiencing some of that, and I keep my eye on things that's percolating online, and I see that even in the last, I would say, 3 or 4 weeks, it's really exploded. The stories that people are telling about Muslims and how and the Mamdani in New York and how he's actually a terrorist. Like, what the? It's just complete falsehood that's being really pushed. So we're experiencing some of that too. But I'll return to the patience that I've seen in our community, and our tradition speaks to being patient. Our tradition speaks to even tribulation as being beneficial. One of my teachers. I studied a book with him called "The 17 Benefits of Tribulation." It's a 13th century book by a Syrian scholar called. His name is Abdus Salam. He's a great scholar, and the book is "The 17 Benefits of Tribulation," and it goes through. Here's all these different benefits of tribulation, like why it's good for you, And so, I mean, I wish we had time to list them out. They're amazing. If you think about it, like learning to depend on God and having humility and, learning patience and all these incredible things. So, we're experiencing some difficulty in our community for sure. but we're also experiencing we're also witnessing incredible beauty and patience and resilience and the human spirit shining through in many ways. And like maybe something we think it's bad and it's actually good for us. We don't know. So, yeah.
I'll keep mine a little short. So my Christian community, like many others, is not a monolith. So we deal with our emotions and what we feel towards the world right now in different ways. All of us do. There are some people that don't really feel shaken by the current political state currently right now. And they kind of see a more positive shift than negative, if anything. But there are people like me included that do feel a negative shift more than a positive, and we don't really feel good. So that in itself, like these differing perspectives that we have is a challenge. I don't know if any of you guys have heard anything about Korean churches specifically, but Korean people in general, like they're very conservative. They come from a more traditional background. Like my country is just more traditional and conservative. And so immigrating to America, they take a lot of those same values and beliefs to the country. And they're very loyal. So they stick to those beliefs and those values. But at the end of the day, what I really appreciate most is our primary source of solace. Like we're not in unity at the end of the day because of a political agreement, but really because at the foot of the cross. So whether we're serving back to the homeless in our community, or we're praying all for one another, like these are all moments I feel like, even though they're tiny, I really appreciate, and I see that, we are a family in Christ. Yeah.
Right, so we're running, we're pretty much done, but I want to end with one final question that can be brief. What brings you joy?
I can go. My family and friends, I would say, bring me the greatest joy in life. I know it's such a simple and basic answer that people probably feel grateful for almost every single day, but for me, as somebody that is really extroverted, very empathetic, that has gone through a lot in life, the meaningful connections that I've built over these past years are truly special to me, that I really hold close and dear to my heart. And my family, regardless of how broken or dysfunctional we may be, we are still together as one. And they have always supported me from day one, and we all have such unconditional love for one another. And finding unconditional love truly is so hard to find. And so I'm really blessed to be surrounded by so many great people that really do support and love and cherish me. So yeah, that's what brings me joy.
Let's see what brings me joy. Well, I would say just being in a state of gratitude is sort of unlocks the doorway to joy, because we can certainly be in a state of complaint and despair and feeling sad or whatever. These are all opportunities for us. We choose as human beings how we want to feel, really. And you can see people with the most difficult circumstances who are still joyful. So I think it's up to us to choose whether to be joyful. And we have to access the places of joy, which I think gratitude is a foundation for that. So I say when I'm in a state of gratitude, I feel more joyful, and I believe there's like a cellular shift that happens in your body. Like all your cells in your body change when you shift from being in a state of complaining to in a state of gratitude. I think I've felt that for sure. So there's that, and I think just being with my family, being in community, being outdoors, experiencing the beauty of God's creation, and and then being with people and laughing. I think laughter is super important, right? Like, can you laugh? Can you find things to laugh at? You can start with laughing at yourself. That's a good place to start. There's always things to laugh about, and laughter is so amazing what it does to the body and to the soul. So try to laugh some, as long as you're not laughing at someone else's expense, right? That's not the good kind of laughter, but I would say those things, and exercising and being with people, and so that brings me joy. Yeah.
Well, certainly my family and friends and the resilience that we practice together brings me a great deal of joy. Also, truly, I think what came up for me when Lynn said that is the gospel. It teaches me to be in the present moment with all of its joy and grief, and it also teaches me to be alive in the eschatological hope that Jesus talks about in the scriptures. And for me, I don't know how I would be joyful in these times without that kind of hope. And so that for me is what brings me deep joy, along with getting to practice that with my family and my church and our friends. So
I want to add to it, just hear from all three of us, is like this community, I think, is an access point for us to have solace, like we were saying, and some joy and connection. And so community, I think, is a key part of that. Our community is what we do together, so important and meaningful in this time, that we have community, and that you have a congregation that you go to, and you guys eat together, and you laugh together, and you do fun things together. So I just wanted to call that out, because it stood out from all three of us to me.
Well, I want to say thank you to all three of you, Chloe, Zach, Erin. For the wisdom, the words, and the love that you shared tonight. We have time for everyone to briefly interact with their neighbor if they would like. We have a few questions on the back. If you got a program, I think that the questions were on there, were they? Mm-hmm. What inspired you? What challenged you? Obviously, 5 minutes, 10 minutes is not going to be enough time to answer that all, but what did you notice shift within you? What is one specific action you might take? Maybe share with someone near you how you're feeling, how this went, what you thought.
Oh, okay.
Does that give you joy?
It does bring me joy, but I thought it was going to be too repetitive.
No, I was almost going to tell you, what about singing? Move closer together?
Yeah, and I got Lynn behind you.
Okay. Slide in north. Up there, yeah. That's good.
Everybody looking pretty. I'm going to take a couple. Thank you so much, you guys. It's terrific. Good to everybody. Very articulate, very heartfelt. One final benediction, please.
hear a lot of good conversation out there, but I want to respect everyone's time and bring this to a close. If I can. So before you head out, I'll remind you that these little QR codes on the back of the on the back of the program can lead to a donation. Just so you know. And before you leave, I will offer a final close, I guess, by a very activist minister from the Methodist tradition, a guy named Ted Loder. Empower me to be a bold participant rather than a timid saint in waiting, in the difficult ordinariness of now, to exercise the authority of honesty rather than to defer to power, or deceive to get it, to influence someone for justice rather than impress anyone for gain, and by grace to find treasures of joy, of friendship, of peace, hidden in the fields of the daily you give me to plow. Go in peace.